afternoon, everybody. Shh, if I get your attention, please. I want to thank everybody for being patient. Our council meeting ran a little long today, so we've started our committee meeting, Health, Education, Neighborhood Councils meeting a little bit late. It is now about 2:05, and we are in room 1010 in City Hall, and we have quorum, and I'd like to call this meeting of the Health, Education, Neighborhood Council Committee to order. Thank you so very much. And I want to remind everybody who wants to speak for public comment to please fill out in the back, in the kiosk, your entry so we could get you to speak on any of the items or public comment. Now, I want to start with multiple item public comments. Oh, there isn't any? Okay, so there is none. And so I want to open it up for general public comment at this time. General public comment. So these are the folks who don't. Is this general public comment? Okay, here we go. And this is for general public comment. And for those, and I just want to let people know in advance. I know there's a lot of neighborhood council members here. If your neighborhood council did fill out a CIS form, then I will give you extra time, but it is only one per council. So if you have fellow neighborhood councils from the same neighborhood council, if you could have one representative for the extra time, okay? And for general public comment, could I get Gary, Agus, Cindy Cleghorn, and Nina Royal? Come on up. Give you guys a minute each.
So I actually have a card in for the motions.
Right. So this is for general public comment, and if you sign up for one of the items, then I'll call you for that. And of course, for the CIS for that particular item, we'll give you extra time for your neighborhood council. That's what I was trying to explain. Yes. So this is 1 minute and just general public comment. Please state your name and go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Gary Agus. I retired recently from the Sun Valley Area Neighborhood Council, so I'm just speaking as a private member. I just wanted to thank this committee and particularly you, Mr. Councilman Rue, for your hard work on this. We have a letter that Sun Valley Neighborhood Council put in with our comments on it, and I agree with that. It's a wonderful thing that finally a lot of these things are going to be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. Thank you. My name is Cindy Cleghorn, and I am on the Land Use Committee for the Southern Tahunga Neighborhood Council. However, I'm speaking for myself at this during these comments. I have 3 points that I wanted to make mention of today. One has to do, the first one, with serial meetings. I believe that the neighborhood council system should have more city attorney funding available for neighborhood councils and not have to have their legal responses go only through the NEA, who may only get limited information and may message back incorrectly or watered down. The neighborhood council leaders think that they have their own board and are not understanding what the transparency means as to discussions between the board or committee members. They're using, even with the NEA in the chain, items that could put the city at risk and costly liability. In the case that I'm seeing, it has to do with questions about a stakeholder, former board member, that may be personnel and personal in nature and not within the board's jurisdiction.
You can wrap up?
Yes. It's, okay, so then I'll move on to my second point, which has to do with volunteer name badges.
Actually, sorry, the timer seems to be a little broken right now, so you had a minute. So I apologize. You could, if that item has to do with one of the other items, you could speak on that. And you will have a CIS time for your neighborhood council when we call up the item.
So I only wanted to mention about volunteer name badges that once were out, and also to remind you to save September 28th for the Congress of Neighborhoods.
Thank you. Could I get James On, Everett Banks, and Nina Royal? So again, this is a minute each. And again, if you filled out a CIS form, you will get extra minutes when it comes to your when we have the agenda items.
Good evening, council members. I'll try to be as brief as possible. There seems to be a problem in our neighborhood with literacy. And there are a lot of students need help with their homework and literacy. They have schools, prominent schools in the neighborhood, a private college, and a corp that's funded by the American government. They do not show up when they're supposed to. It's just derelict of duty, if you ask me. Now, number two is that older individuals in the community need help, and competency-based education would be the best route to go to help them, simply because they might feel that they are embarrassed because they can't read. And neighborhood councils, if money is funded to them, they should carry out their duties to do their work for literacy. Please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And your name was?
Everett Banks, Vice President of Central Alameda Neighborhood Council.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
If you could state your name first.
My name is James Ahn. I'm here on behalf of the Korean American Federation of Los Angeles. President Laura Jun was sick, so she couldn't make it. My colleagues and I have been particularly vocal in our concern with the community interest stakeholder voter eligibility reform. As you're all aware, we had an attempted subdivision on June 19th, which would have split the WCKNC Neighborhood Council. I believe that those who are in support of eliminating the community interest stakeholder from being eligible to vote may be concerned about special interest groups that are trying to take over an NC or voting in our elections to promote personal agendas. I think it's safe to say that none of those people that came out in the Koreatown subdivision were not part of any special interest groups. They came out to attempt to preserve what they helped build through generations of hard work. So I urge the Neighborhood Council Committee to be extremely careful when making a decision on this matter, and I encourage you to support those that want to participate in civic engagement, no matter where they live in the city of Los Angeles. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Nina Royal, and I served on the Salantanga Neighborhood Council for 14 years and presently on land use and safety committees. I have a problem with something that's been put out by the city clerk, and it says who can run or represent their neighborhood. You can if you live, work, rent, or own property, attend school, worship, volunteer, or participate in an organization that meets and or serves the neighborhood. We've had problems with the and or part as to what it constitutes an organization that serves the neighborhood. It's not defined enough whether or not it's a 501c3 or et cetera. And we've had people come as far as Long Beach and et cetera. In the 2016 election, we had over 100 voters that had really no contact with the city that claimed they belonged to a fight club. I resent this. This is not right, and we need to be more definitive as to who serves the community. And secondly, social media needs to be controlled by the people that are on the board. Thank you.
Thank you. And that closes general public comments. Mr. Weston, if you don't mind, and if there are no objections, I'd like to take item number 4 on consent. Great. So moved. Thank you. Now, moving along to item number 1. Mr. CLA, could you read that item to the record, please?
Motion Rue Blumenfield relative to the proposed reforms to the neighborhood council system.
Thank you. And at this point, I'm going to call public comment. And again, what I said earlier, we have about 15 people signed up for this item. I will give 1 minute each. But if you are on behalf of your neighborhood council going to speak on CIS, I will give you 3 minutes. So if you could first come up and say your name and what neighborhood council you represent. And if that neighborhood council, the CIS has already been spoken for, then the next person can't speak on that, okay? But you do have a minute. So could I have Schaefer, Mike O'Gara, and Betsy Israelite come on up?
Len Schaefer, representing the commission. I just put one in just in case.
Okay. Well, no, you're one of our commissioners, so
Yes.
we'll call you up later. Thank you, sir.
My name is Mike O'Gara. I'm a member of the Sun Valley Area Neighborhood Council, and you have all the CISs on there. We couldn't, CIS wouldn't give us enough room to respond to your request, so we wrote a 4-page letter, submitted it in June. I wanted to make sure it didn't get lost. I resubmitted that letter today. So please read my letter, or the neighborhood council's letter.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. And we did get your letter, as well as all the other neighborhood councils who submitted. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Betsy Israelite. I'm with the Silver Lake neighborhood.
Wait, can you first state if you're going to do CIS or not?
Oh, we did submit a CIS.
No, I mean if you need the 3 minutes or if you're going to take one.
I don't think I'll need 3, but I might
Okay.
go
So let's
a little
give
over
it
one.
3.
Yeah, okay. We submitted a CIS in support of File 180467. We strongly support these reforms, and in particular, we believe there must be a clear and uniform definition of what constitutes a stakeholder across the neighborhood councils. We believe that the lack of a uniform definition holds neighborhood councils to a lower standard than other elected officials. We also think it creates a form of invisible gerrymandering where a special interest group could move into a neighborhood council voting and assume control of a neighborhood council. We've been struggling with a situation on our own board where a constituent has filed grievances against the eligibility of a board member, and because our bylaws are not in agreement with what Dunn states constitutes a stakeholder, there's been a lot of tension and dissension. In addition, we strongly support and respectfully that the committee consider creating memorandum of understandings between each department and neighborhood councils. We have a very strong one with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which has been incredibly helpful as we address issues like the Silver Lake Reservoir Complex, the upcoming construction on Fletcher. We have a wonderful working relationship with LADWP, and it's helped us keep everyone informed in Silver Lake. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. And again, even though we give you 3 minutes, you do not have to use all 3 minutes. Thank you, Betsy. Allison Reagan, James On, and Steve Bay, please. If you guys could come on up. And again, if you're going to take the 3 minutes on behalf of your neighborhood council because you filled out the CIS, please state that first. Otherwise, we're going to give you a minute, okay? So Allison Bay and James On, can you come on up too? State your name, please.
My name is Steve Bay. I just need 1 minute. So my name is Steve Bay. Once again, I am here to request that the council consider language-specific services. Even on your agenda here for today, you have a little blurb on here about interpretive services. So we request that you consider that as a position for a community interest stakeholder, because there are so many constituents that go to specific communities that look for language-specific services because they can't find that anywhere else other than these diverse communities that we are all part of. Most people sadly don't speak English. Some of the neighbor council meetings are even conducted in a different language and then interpreted into English. So I request that you guys do consider language-specific services to be a person that seeks these services as a community interest stakeholder. Thank you.
My name is James, and I'll just take 1 more minute.
1 minute?
Yes.
Okay.
Korean American Federation for the last, I would say, almost going on 3 months now, has been conducting a petition drive, and we would like to formally submit to the council 13,415 written by pen signatures for what we believe is in support of keeping the community interest stakeholder to be a little bit more inclusive rather than exclusive. The writing is both here in Korean and in English, and we would like to formally submit that to the board at this time. And that is all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Give it to the
As far
office.
as this is concerned, we do have. if I can-
No, I'm sorry. You have that 1 minute. Yeah.
because the
Could I get Allison Rake,
personal information.
Laura Velke, Melissa Garza, and Patricia Kim? State your name and listen if you're going to take the 3 minutes. Otherwise, you're just getting the 1, okay?
Oh.
Go ahead.
Who'd you call
Doesn't matter.
first? Oh.
Sure, just state your
Oh,
name.
Melissa Garza. I'm actually with the Wilshire Center Koreatown Neighborhood Council.
Take 1 minute or 3 minutes?
I'll go ahead and take up to 3.
Well, no, I mean, your neighbor council, yeah, right. If you're the designated speaker, then you could take
I'm not the
three.
designated speaker, but they've already.
Sure.
So I just wanted to speak on behalf of the Wilshire Center Koreatown Neighborhood Council. What my business here is because of the community impact stakeholder terms that have been set and what happened in the recent election. I feel that there's a lot of self-segregation that is happening in that community and what happened with that election. There needs to definitely be some more exclusive rules when it comes to a stakeholder. I think it really needs to be imperative that stakeholders either live in the district, they own property, and they serve, they actually have a district rather than having an outside entity come in and be able to take over or to determine elections or to change circumstances that happen. I think it's really important just to make sure that there's more checks and balances coming in and that we all have a uniform term. I also want to make sure that neighborhood councils are not left to designate how a community impact stakeholder is determined. I think that needs to come from a board across, not individual entities, because if individual entities have a stake in that, then they can kind of bend the rules to work for their areas. I think there needs to be something that's clear and concise that, that maybe both parties have to work on some kind of shift, but I think that it really depends on who lives there, who serves and who owns property there. I mean, you can't vote in other elections like congressional elections if you live outside of the district. So that's my piece.
Thank you.
Laura Velke, formerly with the Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council. I just found out on December 1st I was removed from my board. I did write the CIS for this motion, so it's up to you what we want to do. But my position on the CIS, or on the community interest stakeholder, is to just remove it entirely, especially for the 2019 election. It can be reintroduced per neighborhood council. It's clear that Koreatown wants to have this in theirs, so there needs to be language that doesn't allow people outside of the community to infiltrate neighborhood councils. The whole purpose of these neighborhood councils is to get community feedback, and that is happening less and less every day. Accountability has to be included in this process. We had City Attorney Carmen Hawkins lie to the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners and claim that our board never took a vote on our bylaws, and as such, they voted to not let us speak and then turn around and basically use the department's bylaws, even though our board had legally approved it. No information was provided to us. These are the kinds of things that have to stop. Non-agendized items, things, you guys have to do something about this, because we're going to keep writing about it and we're going to keep making noise about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee members and council members, my name is Patricia Kim, and I ask that you consider the ethnic diversity in our community and the significance of language-specific services as it pertains to the substantial and ongoing participation of the community interest stakeholder. Community members of these language services patron and financially contribute ongoing and substantially to medical clinics, pharmacies, financial institutions, and such that they visit. Please do not treat them with insignificance and make them invisible by disqualifying them from being a community interest stakeholder, but recognize their presence as an integral part and contributing part of the neighborhood that they invest their lives in. The quality of their lives are also dependent on these language-specific services. This is about recognizing these patrons as community interest stakeholders, and yes, it's important that they have the right to vote in our neighborhood council elections. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could have Tad Yenawine, Cindy Cleghorn, and Nina Royale. And as they're coming up, or Royal, sorry about that. As they're coming up, I just want to, since people are bringing it up, if you could, hopefully after this item is over, you could stay behind, because item number 2 is about translation services and translation equipment, which we will be trying to institute it system-wide through the neighborhood council. So I just wanted to mention that. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tad Yeno, and I'm the chair of the Echo Park Neighborhood Council, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Neighborhood Council.
So 3 minutes? 3 minutes.
I'm sorry.
First of all, in this country, in our community, we have enormous cultural barriers that prevent communities from getting together, and the ideal of plurality is getting lost daily. Neighborhood councils present one of the few opportunities for non-documented people or undocumented people to be included in a community dialogue, and anything we do needs to be very conscious of including those people, making them feel welcome in a dialogue. It's really one of the only times they get to communicate with the city government. And I think anything that limits the community interest stakeholder definition to exclude those people is really a blow to what amounts to one of the few places that these folks can be properly represented. You can let me know when 3 minutes is up. I don't know.
Well, is it not working?
It's not working.
It's
but,
working.
Go ahead.
The bonk definition that they currently have ahead, I think it's necessary to have a uniform standard across the neighborhood council system. The bonk definition seems to be a pretty good one.
7 minutes.
Okay, thank you. But in any case, please consider that all of our community members need to be represented somehow, and this would be a really good way to do it. Also, in regards to the minimum age requirement, again, neighborhood council is really about community. Encouraging inclusion and people to participate is really necessary. I've been involved in the system for 7 years, and getting participation is hard. Getting people really meaningfully involved is difficult. We can make this a really good system that's a positive for our community and for our city, but only if we continue to be inclusive in this. So, on the other hand, we have had structural problems with people who are under the age of 18 taking part in certain board actions. So I think it should be left up to boards whether those people are allowed to fill, what positions they're allowed to fill on the board itself in order to keep the boards actually being active and effective. And I also wanted to mention that there's been a lot of discussion. Again, my interest is in making neighborhood councils as effective as possible. And while we have an additional recommendation on our CIS that a funded position be made available to take care of the administrative duties of treasurer and secretary to make sure that things get properly posted, that archives are properly and legally kept indefinitely and not up to the whim of whether a web host gets paid or something like that. And that, the number one thing that I've seen where neighborhood councils are impaired is when a treasurer or some kind of action is not able to file the things that are sort of legally required to maintain fluidity. It would really do a lot to alleviate and make neighborhood councils more effective and to allow the board members to focus on things that are really interesting to the community if those administrative tasks were provided for in some way. And I would recommend that one person could probably take on the administrative duties of 10 or 15 neighborhood councils. So it wouldn't be an onerous task, and I think that would be a really good use of our resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Which neighborhood council were you from? I'm sorry.
Echo Park.
Echo Park. Thank you.
We're on the thing as Greater Elysian Echo Park.
Okay, great.
Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Cleghorn, Sunland Tujunga Neighborhood Council, but I'll just use 1 minute, even though Sunland Tujunga did submit a CIS and you have it. I'm just going to speak to 1 or 2 points, and that has to do with the training for land use committees and chairs. I want to emphasize that the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils and Plan Check NC have consistently provided training, and I encourage you to support that. The other has to do with funding, and the final one has to do with city departments. Funding rollovers, encourage that. We lost over $5,000 last year in Sunland Tujunga because we don't have that rollover potential, and we need it for community improvement projects. The other has to do with the relationship between city departments. Neighborhood councils have come a long way in building relationships with several city departments, and we need to keep that going. Don't close it off and limit it to just certain people. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I get Nina Royale? Okay, thank you, Nina. Everett Banks, Laurie Jacobs, and and James Hornick.
I'm with the neighborhood council so I'm going to take my 3 minutes, please.
Okay. Which neighborhood council? I'm sorry.
I'm Laurie Jacobs, and I'm with the Northwest San Pedro Neighborhood Council.
Great.
And first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to do the reforms that were a result of some surveys that you did. However, next time we identified there were 12 separate items in here. If you could itemize them, okay? And in some of them, be a little more definitive. It was hard. They were a little too general. So I'm going to just hit some of the highlights that were most important to my neighborhood council. One, well, first of all, I'm vice president and I'm also outreach chair on my neighborhood council. Please do the rollover. As outreach chair, I won't do any events in like May, June, July, because I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get my expenses covered in that year. It's really hard to manage. So I think every neighborhood council is pretty much in favor of that. Two, on the community interest stakeholder, really important that we nail that down. Some other people mentioned this. We've had problems. We have 3 councils in San Pedro, and they've decided that anybody who shops at a store that's located in there as a stakeholder, anybody who, I'm a Girl Scout leader, Lori, you could be on it, vote on any of them. No, it needs to be defined. It needs to be the people who are really representing that area, because it's caused a lot of, I guess they call it gerrymandering, but misrepresentation in swaying people to vote certain ways. We need to get back to people who live there, work there, have a business there. None of this other wishy-washy stuff. We need to really button that down. Let's see. Creating the one-time review process overseen by the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. We are not in favor of that, and I will, in full disclosure, say that the president of our council is a bond commissioner. We feel Dunn should work with the few neighborhood councils that have issues, but we don't want Bonk to have control over the bylaws of many neighborhood councils like ours that are functioning very well. We don't need to get into that. And on the last issue on there, in the developing the point of contact lists for key city departments and agencies, and that was very involved. I won't read the whole thing, but we were not in favor of that. We have concerns as communication between city departments and neighborhood councils are a two-way engagement. The way the item is written, it appears that the line of communication is one-sided, giving city departments access to neighborhood council, sharing information. However, it does not appear that there's a component that allows neighborhood councils to have a single point of contact when we need to communicate our concerns. City departments should be compelled to have open two-way access as needed. And that's probably enough, but you have it on file how we registered on all of them. Thank you very much for your time and the work you do.
Thank you. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the pleasure and the honor to, for a few years, have the neighborhood councils in the committee that I oversaw. I made 3 commitments. One commitment was to afford them more time to speak before committees and before the council if they had a community impact statement.
Thank you very
The
much.
other commitment that I made was that we were going to try to increase their budget. So it was 37, I can't remember, and for 2 years, the council gave them the additional money, and then we were successful in having the mayor add that additional money into their budgets. The third thing was it only made sense to me, and I would like to just ask you, and kind of hate to catch you off guard, but too many people have referenced it today, and I've spoken to the department for it prior to the city clerk being engaged. We have to come up with a realistic way to afford them the opportunity to roll money over.
Thank you.
We just have to. Because what happens, a lot of the money that's spit towards the end is just silly spending. It's not because they had the time. So I will commit to you that I hope to work with the chair to take that item and put it back up at the top of the agenda as one of the reforms that we need to do. So those were the 3 promises that I made, and agreed to work on others, but those were 3 promises that I made, and those are 3 promises I would love to be able to keep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Wesson, well noted, and after speaking with your offices, that was one of the main things that we wanted to make sure was included in these reforms, and it is item number 7 as part of our reform, where we will have an ability for every neighborhood council to roll over their money. So we made sure that that was included in the list of recommendations, and actually that's one that we're going to instruct today to make sure that it happens, not a study, not a report back. So great. Next, go ahead. State your name. Well, you can go first. Go ahead.
Hello, James Hornick, Region 6 Budget Advocate. This is my third year serving the community. Up until recently, I was president of Westlake South. So if we want to talk reform, I think we need to talk reforming done. I think it's the biggest problem with the neighborhood council system. I've had ongoing issues with our department's NEA, doing clear violations of the Brown Act and ethical questions, overruling a board's vote and paying his friend $2,000 for services that were never rendered. I brought these complaints up to Mike Fong just recently, and as a result, our board's meetings were canceled 2 meetings in a row, and over the course, the first meeting, the previous agendas were deleted from the system. The next meeting, the agenda said I was president, but the city's roster had changed, and at the next meeting, the board retreat just a few weeks ago, I was no longer president, yet the board never agendized or voted on this. This was done in direct retaliation for me trying to bring attention to clear violations of the Brown Act. So if we're going to talk reform, we need to talk about reforming the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment.
Thank you.
Good evening, council members. My name is Everett Banks. I'm Vice President of Central Alameda Neighborhood Council. And from the last time I was up here, I'd like to let you know a little statistics. Out of 435 schools that were, how would I say, with academic proficiency index, out of the 435 schools there, Ascot Avenue was number 435. Now, Holmes Avenue was 431. Now, there's a need for reading coaches that they don't have to be college graduates. And back in the 60s when we were coming up, we had parents in the neighborhood that handled the business, educational programs. They were not college graduates. They handled the business in the neighborhood, and they did it very well. And they worked in conjunction with the playground directors. What I'm saying right now is that the playground directors and the parents in the neighborhoods can get the reading indexes and reading scores up for the students in the neighborhoods, and they do not have to be college graduates. So more or less, we need reading readiness coaches in the neighborhood in order to handle the literacy problems that are existing in this neighborhood, especially in the Central Alameda Neighborhood Council area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that is all of the public speakers. Thank you so very much. And before I call the department up, I just want to give a little quick backdrop. And, you know, this is, Mr. Weston, as you spoke, this is 10 years in the making, or if not even longer. And this is a long time coming, and I want to thank all of my predecessors, including yourself, who was the chair of this neighborhood council, and even before you was Councilmember Paul Cleghorn, who was chair of neighborhood councils, and many of the neighborhood councils who are here. This is something that we talked about for when I was a neighborhood council member over a decade ago. So this is a decade-long process, and before us is a list of proposed recommendations. But before they're discussed, I want to provide some context and also allow members to ask questions. But in 1999, the city charter established a neighborhood council system and the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to promote civic participation and ensure government is responsive to local needs. And for the next 2 decades, the system has grown and changed. As a matter of fact, in my short tenure as neighborhood council chair, representing the neighborhood council system in the committee, neighborhood council grew from 97 to 99 in the city of LA. And a number of reform measures have also made their way through this body, and the Board of Neighborhood Commission, and to the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners as well as the department. And since being appointed chair of this committee, I set out to review the current issues facing the neighborhood council system and hear from the neighborhood councils on the challenges that they face. So my office sent out a survey to every neighborhood council board member in December of last year asking for recommendations on areas of the system that could benefit from greater evaluation. On top of that, I've personally made visits to as many neighborhood councils as well as groups of neighborhood councils, as well as getting all the notes and recommendations from all of your listening sessions that you had, Council President, as well as Councilmember Paul Cleghorn, who in his tenure as chair of this committee also went on a listening tour and got lots of input from various neighborhood council members. After receiving all of that input, I introduced a motion that reflected the recommendations that I heard and instructed the city staff to report back to this committee with analysis and recommendations on the proposed reforms. I also sent a second letter in May of this year to all neighborhood councils asking for feedback, formal community impact statements, or comments from individual members and stakeholders to help inform the process moving forward. And I really want to thank about a third of the neighborhood councils who submitted community impact statements, as well as detailed community impact statements on each and every one of the proposed reforms. And that's where we are today. Not only have we received the community impact statements, but we've also received numerous letters, mails from stakeholders, as well as petitions and recommendations from both the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners and the department. So that's where we are today, and I think it's a good place to move forward with, and so we could discuss the recommendations that are before us. But before I kick it off, I want to bring up the department. I want to first bring up the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. Bonk, we have two members here. Come on up, and if you could, I want to give you some time to talk about this process, because in addition to all of the input and listening tours that the three previous chairs, and including myself, went through, you guys yet again went to the communities and did a community input process as well in hearing. So.
Leonard Schaefer, Board of Neighborhood Commissioners, and I was thinking going back to Janice Hahn on the previous committees. I spoke to Joy Atkinson, our chair, and she asked me to come here and speak to you today. We submitted two letters, one going through all of the recommendations except the second, which had to do with community interest stakeholder, and then one with community interest stakeholder by itself. And I just want to run through a couple of things for you so you've got an understanding of where we were as we came to these. And this had to do with what we heard from neighborhood councils as well. With regards to the first question about renaming and changing the charter, a lot of people have some problem with the names, but don't believe that the expense of a charter amendment would be justified. And Commissioner Lippman pointed out that we could do branding very nicely and people would get used to them. He pointed out that the Board of Police Commissioners is branded as the Los Angeles Police Commission. And if you Google LA Police Commission, they come up, and even their standard says Los Angeles Police Commission when they're actually Board of Police Commissioners. So we could easily do that. And that's where we got to with that. And most neighborhood councils we talked to thought that the expense of going through a charter change probably was not justified in this instance. Moving on to whether or not there should be selections. We heard from a couple of neighborhood councils that have been very successful at using selections, one of which is Chatsworth. They've actually turned out a manual, but we found out that other neighborhood councils, and I'll use Bel Air Beverly Crest as an example, they have elected members, but then they have selected members from various property owners groups, and that would not qualify as an election. They said they'd be perfectly willing to tighten up that selection if need be. But we've got a couple of other neighborhood councils. I believe Westwood works the same way. Some of their members and even some of the Valley neighborhood councils allow certain organizations to select a member of their board. So we concluded that selection should remain, and the majority of people that we heard from concluded that also. With regard to us looking at neighborhood council bylaws, a good suggestion was made again by Commissioner Lippman with regards to giving neighborhood councils more information after the 2020 census so they get a better feel of who are their stakeholders, and let them look over their own bylaws and see if they're being represented and such as that, and then applying to change those bylaws if necessary. And we agreed with him that giving them more information would help with regards to how they've formulated their boards and such as that. The voting age, it started out with a voting age only, 16, and somehow ended up as both a voting age and 18, under 18 for board members. That was the only split vote we had. That was 3 yes, 2 no, and 1 abstention. And I can tell you personally, the abstention was so that because abstentions count as a yes vote, that the matter would come before this committee and perhaps the city council for further study, because the question becomes whether or not that interferes with the charter right of neighborhood councils in the manner in which they choose their boards. So that was...
Commissioner Schaefer, we really appreciate all of the work that you guys put into this. The department is going to come up and go through every single one of the recommendations, so if you could give us some of the key highlights.
Okay.
Or the some particular items you really want us to know about. And I know Commissioner Lippman also has wanted to say a few words as well.
We'll go to it very quickly. Same-day elections, we thought it was a very good idea because of the way community outreach could be, but the question really is, does the clerk's office have the ability to handle perhaps as many as 3,000 candidates on one day? And that's what you're really looking at. You've got about 1,800 board members right now. If you start looking at maybe 3 candidates per board position, you're up to even just 2 to a board position. You're up to an awful lot of candidates. With regards to the single contact with city departments, we looked at that in a couple of ways. Functioning neighborhood councils make their own contacts and have their own access to departments, and they thought that this would be too restrictive. But we looked at other neighborhood councils that don't have that ability or haven't made those contacts, and to have a single point of contact with a department who could then point you where to go to get the information, and have a single point of contact appointed by the neighborhood council, which would work in the other direction. So those are important. I'll get on to the most important. That is...
Do you mind if I'll tackle this one? Or?
Okay.
Go
Okay. I want to get on to the most important and then turn it over to Eli. Or he wanted to speak to one item.
Okay.
Eli,
Great.
then I'll go to this one first. Okay. Obviously, the most important is community interest stakeholder. First of all, there's a consensus among neighborhood councils that there be something there other than just lives, works, and owns real property. They wanted some additional, and that was the consensus that we saw. We had 2 tasks. Task 1, the city council passed an ordinance that said, hi, you guys figure it out if you can. So we did 1 recommendation. The other was this committee's request of what do we do? Do we keep it? Do we get rid of it? Do we redefine it? And we did that. I tackled the definition, the straight definition of substantial and ongoing. Commissioner Lippman tackled why don't we get rid of it and just name a new stakeholder by what they do, define it by what they do rather than calling it a name. We took this out. We had lots and lots of discussion on it. We had some neighborhood councils who agreed, others who said, no, we'd like it more expansive. Commissioner Lippman and I spent some periods of time on the telephone and such, going back and forth. And if you'll notice, they're fairly well in agreement. The major differences, well, let me get to the agreements and then one major. Okay, the major agreements are you have to belong to or participate in a community organization. And that's an organization that has to be in existence for 1 or more years. It has to be an organization that confers some benefit on the community. It has to have a physical address. We've had Facebook groups that have been considered as community interest stakeholders, and they've been able to vote even though they live totally outside the community. This happened down in one of the San Pedro elections. We wanted to leave room for individualization, and that's why it was such as these type. And that's why Commissioner Lippman said, if you want to define within the parameters that we've set out, go ahead and define within those parameters. One of the major differences is the one that responded strictly to the city council put a 30-day membership on whoever belongs or participates in an organization. The one that responded to your request has no time limits on it. One of the things that we felt was very important because of communication that we had received from the clerk's office, and the clerk has talked about it in different alliances and such, as they also wanted guidance as to what is a community interest stakeholder. Because we have the 2019 elections coming up. And that's why I pressed at our commission that we get a response to the city council as soon as we could, because I knew that we would probably take more time on the reform issues before this committee, because we've got the elections coming up very soon. So we submitted both of our recommendations. Perhaps one could be used in the 2019 elections, and then the other could expand upon that and modify that as we ongo with these recommendations that this committee has been so good as to put out to neighborhood councils. And that's where we are. I don't think I have to go over what those definitions are. I will say we had some battles, but I think we came out with some pretty good ideas.
Thank you, Commissioner Schaefer. Commissioner Lippman, do you want to add anything?
I simply wanted to add that we had over 6 meetings, 1 town hall, and received hundreds of public comments in a number of public forums on both of these, on all of these items. So I think we did a really good job of doing our due diligence and talking with neighborhood council stakeholders to ensure that we could present you, the committee, and the city council with our recommendations. And, you know, I again, just to reiterate his point, you know, what we wanted to provide you is options. We wanted to provide you with guide rails of, well, this definition is a little bit more restrictive. This one's a little bit more liberal. You can choose one, you can choose both, you can figure it out in the middle. But we wanted to give you, as city council members, options in terms of how we consider what this other stakeholder could or should be. So that's it. And we look forward to working with you as we move this forward. And finally, I would just say to you, thank you, Councilmember Rue, thank you, Council President Wesson, for not only putting this on the table and putting it out there, but extending the time period that you allow neighborhood councils to submit community impact statements. I mean, the fact that a third of neighborhood councils submitted statements and that there's this many people here today for this meeting is both a testament to the fact that you allowed that, but the testament to the fact that this really matters for neighborhood councils and they care deeply and wanted to participate. So I'm glad that this was an open process, that it was a transparent process, and that we're putting these issues, we're all in the, we talk about being all in the family a lot, but we put it out there, right? We put our warts out there, and we're talking about it, and we're going to work it out. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the Commission and also to Dunn for really accommodating, doing additional town halls, as well as moving town halls to accommodate for more people to come. So really appreciate all of your efforts and everything that you guys did. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you. If I could have the department come on up. I have a quick question, and Mr. Wesson might have some questions too, but first, can you just, Commissioner Schaefer kind of went through the report, but you want to kind of quickly walk us through the report and your proposed recommendations?
Yes, good afternoon, council members. Gracie Liu, General Manager for the Department of Neighbor Empowerment. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Just a few things that I wanted to highlight. The community interest stakeholder definition, I just want to emphasize that there's been 2 reviews of the plan in 2007 and also in 2011. And in both times, the analysis came back for the expanded stakeholder definition, which includes the community interest stakeholder and businesses in particular. The issue has not been necessarily with that definition as it has been with the verification of documents. So the Starbucks one receipt verification, that's what led to the current community interest stakeholder definition, and then during subdivision, 2 receipts are allowed, and I think that when you look at like receipts being allowed to verify, that becomes an issue because when you look at the other stakeholderships, like they have to show house deeds, a business got to show their license, operating licenses. It's just not equitable in terms of comparison. So I think that, the department is supportive of the expanded definition. You just have to look at the verification of documents as being the thing to fix. Selections, I think we can definitely work with the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners to fix some of the selection issues. Some neighborhood councils, like Chatsworth Neighborhood Council, have been very successful. They've had 900 people turn out at their selections. I just think that some of those neighborhood councils who don't have that type of turnout need to be reverted back to election cycles if they consistently just end up with just the candidates voting for themselves and seating themselves in the selection process. We're also supportive of the lowering the age to 16. However, we do know other neighborhood councils who have lowered it even further than 16. There's 19 neighborhood councils who have from 12 to 15 as their age of participation and to vote, and we would support allowing those neighborhood councils to maintain those the younger ages because that's what works for the neighborhood, and we want to acknowledge and appreciate that. And lastly, in terms of planning and land use training, I know in the reforms it's limited to chairs and of the board and committees. We support anyone who is voting on planning and land use issues to take this training, that to be mandated for everyone, not just limited to the chairs. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Just a quick question. So, for the stakeholder definition, can you, and I know the commissioners alluded to it as well, it looked like you were first considering the more strict definition of live, work, or own property only, but because of what you stated, I just want to make it clear for the audience, you opted to recommend the more expansive definition because it's a lot harder to prove all these other things. So, and so today you're recommending the more expansive definition, right?
Yes, and noting too that the plan has been reviewed twice, and that's always come back as expanded.
Mm-hmm. And then can you talk about the organizations that qualify for the expansive definition? Can you kind of go over that part?
Well, it would be schools and nonprofits, that's already under work. Schools, like people who own horses, businesses, pretty much anyone who's involved in the community. I know the Commissioner Schaefer mentioned the Facebook group. We had something similar in another neighborhood council where there was an online group. However, this online group also would meet occasionally within that neighborhood council, and this group had like 700 people who wanted to participate in the neighborhood council, and we found that group was acceptable because they were an acknowledged group that had been around for over a year and also met regularly. So it's been, includes almost anyone who participates in that community. That also, like for Griffith Park, people who, use Griffith Park. And the issue again comes down to how do you prove that you're regular, ongoing, substantial, and that's the thing that's tricky, and I think that's has always been kind of our downfall.
So the stakeholder definition, along with many of the other things, it looks like you're going to be, in particular this one, you'll be working with a city clerk and a city attorney to flush some of that out, right? Some of those concerns out.
We can do that, but in order for some of the effects of what the commission has recommended to take effect in 2019 elections, which we hope would happen, the city council has to take action on their recommendations, which, by the way, excludes business receipts, or actually businesses. Yes.
So it looks like, again, it's basically an organization that performs verifiable ongoing activities and operations that confer with some of the benefits of the community, and they could include chambers of commerce, houses of worship, or faith-based organization, educational institutions, schools, nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, all qualify. And the only criteria is that those organizations would have to be in existence for over a year prior to the election.
Right, but it does exclude businesses.
Okay.
Which has been included in the past.
And it also looks like many of the items are report backs that still needs to be worked out, except for items like number 7, which is the rollover, $10,000 rollover, which doesn't require a report back, or item number 9, where we're trying to augment the neighborhood councils by asking General Services Department to help find neighborhood councils find shared space, as well as item number 10, where you're going to be ongoing compendium of best practices for neighborhood councils, right? On policymaking, legislative process, financial management, a lot of things that the neighborhood councils have concerns about, as well as item 11, which you'll do immediately, of finding departmental contacts for all the various city agencies. So it looks like half of it you'll be implementing immediately, while the other half you'll be bringing it back. Do you want to add anything, Holly?
Holly Walcott, City Clerk. I'm just, for the record, the administrative code does not allow any change to the community interest stakeholders within 7 days of an election period starting, and that day is Sunday. So while we can flesh out the existing definition, as you have suggested, the chair has recommended, but we can't actually change the definition for 2019 of community, unless you do it before Sunday. What's that?
Yeah. So yeah. So go ahead, Councilman.
I have, Mr. Chairman, anyway, I think these are great. All of the recommendations are great. And like I said, I have a personal interest in item 7. But I have always been intrigued by item 8 that deals with the elections. So the suggestion that they all be done in one day, wow, I think that makes a lot of sense if that's possible for a lot of reasons, where it relates to outreach and things of that nature. But Commissioner Schaefer also brought up a good point where it related to the ability for that to be done. So all I want to say is, I'm not saying, hey, that's the way that we should go, but I wouldn't just look at it on one day and then come back and suggest that, oh, that doesn't work. Because you could look at creative things like all of the elections being done in 1 month.
Right.
All of the elections being done so that we could at least focus our resources on outreach or what have you. So I am very curious as to what happens with this. So I'm not saying
Staff has prepared a report. We have not released it yet on what it would take to do that. As Commissioner Schaefer mentioned, it's not only the number of candidates, but it's also the number of ballot styles. Yeah. When you're doing a regular election citywide, you're dealing with a couple of hundred, so you would be talking about thousands of different ballot styles. That's what would create the confusion. So, we have come up, with some possible solutions, and we will report back on that.
Well, I'm just excited about that. I'm glad we're having a conversation
I don't think it's feasible.
about it. No, but still, sometimes you may want to change something today. It may take weeks or it may take a year, but we have to have this conversation, because a lot of the neighborhood councils, when I did go on my tour, they had concerns about they had to pay to pay for outreach and advertising and things of that nature. And the money that we give the neighborhood councils, in my view, is always intended on being spent to make the community better, not to recruit candidates to run. So this is a problem worth our effort in trying to solve.
Thank you, Mr. Wesson. And, one of the instructions that we're going to give out today is to do exactly that, to ask the city clerk to work with Dunn and to report back in 120 days about elections, whether it's...
Oh, no, it's yours.
Yeah.
Great.
Right. Whether it's 1 day or 1 week or 1 month or however it is economically as well as efficiency-wise. We look forward to seeing that report. So, do you have any other questions?
No, these are great.
Yeah. Great. So, with that said, we, based on your report, your extensive report from Dunn as well as Bonk, thank you again for all of your work. I do have 12 recommendations here that the CLA is going to read in. Who's going to, city attorney? City attorney's going to read in?
No, CLA.
Oh, CLA is going to read in, all right.
Yeah. Recommendation number 1, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to begin phasing out the use of the term Empower LA in any and all print and/or online messaging and branding, and report back to the Health, Education, Neighborhood Councils Committee in 120 days with a status update and methods to more cohesively brand the neighborhood council system. Recommendation number 2, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to develop formal rules, guidelines, and a process for neighborhood council selections, including minimum requirements for outreach and allowable seat criteria, and report back to the Health, Education, Neighborhood Council Committee in 120 days with a strategy and timeline for implementation. Recommendation number 3, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment with the assistance of the city clerk to report back to the committee in 120 days with suggestions on how to deliver demographic and neighborhood data to neighborhood councils that would point out areas where current seat allocations, when compared to the data, may not be equitable, and written suggestions for ways each neighborhood council could amend their bylaws to create a more equitable allocation of seats if the data shows potential inequities. Recommendation number 4, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment with the assistance of the city attorney to report back on establishing rules and guidelines stipulating that after each decennial census, neighborhood councils will evaluate any seats to residency and allocate those seats proportionally based on population. Recommendation number 5, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to implement a system-wide minimum voting age and board member age of 16, with the exception of up to 1 youth seat per neighborhood council, in which the minimum age to vote or hold a seat can be as low as 14 years old. Recommendation number 6, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and Department of City Planning to design and implement a mandatory planning and land use management training required of both current and future chairs and vice chairs of neighborhood council planning and land use committees, and report back to the committee in 120 days with the status update on the rollout of training. Recommendation number 7, instruct the city clerk and the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to implement a process by May 1st, 2018 for neighborhood councils to roll over a non-cumulative maximum of $10,000 in any given fiscal year.
We'll get you a copy.
He said 18, so.
Number 8, instruct the city clerk with the assistance of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to report back to the committee in 120 days on the feasibility of holding.
For recommendation number 7, just for the record, it's May 1, 2019. Is that the intent of the committee?
Right.
Thank you. Recommendation number 8, instruct the city clerk with the assistance of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to report back to the committee in 120 days on the feasibility of holding all neighborhood council elections on the same day in order to provide for uniform citywide outreach and advertising and increased voter turnout. Recommendation number 9, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment with the assistance of the General Services Department to assist neighborhood councils with assessing shared space and city facilities as envisioned in Council File 16-0298 and report back to the committee in 120 days with a status update on the implementation of the program and a process for notifying neighborhood councils. Recommendation number 10, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to develop an ongoing compendium of best practices for community engagement, policy making, legislative processes, and financial management, among others, generated in collaboration with neighborhood councils, and develop a working how-to manual to be periodically disseminated to neighborhood councils and report back to the committee and with a status update in 120 days. Recommendation number 11, instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to develop a departmental point of contact list for all city departments, bureaus, or agencies, including but not limited to Department of Aging, Animal Service, Cannabis Regulation, Contract Administration, Disability, Economic and Workforce Development, Emergency Management, Finance, Los Angeles Fire Department, Housing Community Investment, City Planning, Los Angeles Fire Department, Housing and Community Investment, City Planning, Los Angeles Police Department, Port of LA, Recreation and Parks, Transportation, Water and Power, Los Angeles World Airports, the Zoo and City Sanctioned Business Investment Districts, and the assistance of aforementioned entities, and share the contact lists with the entire board of the neighborhood councils, facilitate training for departmental points of contact on best practices for assisting neighborhood councils, and coordinate with neighborhood councils to appoint designated point of contact between the neighborhood council membership and each department, creating a single responsible point of communication following in both directions. If no neighborhood council contact is appointed, the neighborhood council president or chair shall be the default contact. Recommendation number 12, request the city attorney with the assistance of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and city clerk to prepare and present an ordinance by January 14th, 2019 to amend the Los Angeles Administrative Code to define community interest stakeholder as any individual who lives, works, or owns real property in the neighborhood, and also to those who participate in or are member of a community organization, defined as a named entity which has a physical street address within the boundaries of the neighborhood council for not less than 1 year prior to the neighborhood council election or selection, which performs verifiable ongoing activities and operations that confer some benefits on the city. This may include, but is not limited to, Chamber of Commerce, houses of worship, or other faith-based organization, educational institutions, a nonprofit organization, or other such community-based organizations. Neighborhood councils may and are encouraged to expand the definition by amending their bylaws to include other defined groups of stakeholders that conform to the above definitions.
Thank you. And with no objections, I'd like to move these recommendations so we can move it along to the City Council. Thank you, Mr. Wesson. And thank you so very much, and congratulations to all the neighborhood councils that were involved, and to Dunn and to Bonk. Thank you so very much for all of your participation. We have to move on to item number 2. CLA, if you could read that in.
Item number 2 is Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and City Administrative Office report relative to the costs associated with the translation services to neighborhood councils that require them, and the feasibility of funding and service from the Neighborhood Council Empowerment Fund.
Okay, we have 4 speakers: Laura Velke, Phyllis Ling, Darcy Harris, and Mickey Jackson. If you guys could all come on up.
I would like to also speak, but I couldn't sign up because the kiosk closed for this meeting.
Okay, come on up. If you guys could all come on up, please. We have to, we started our meeting late, and we have to really close out while we have quorum, because this is going to be our last meeting.
We know we were here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, council members. So on Laura Belke, formerly Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council, our board has been hit with translation issues for quite some time. When I first came on the board 5 years ago, one of my missions was to try to get translations happening within our board. I went to the department, asked them for help. I was told that we're not required. So what had been the pattern on our board and the abuse of how translations were used on our board was that certain individuals on the board would shake down our colleagues and say, we'll move our board forward if you give us this money for translations. And we dub it as that. There was no accountability for that. So when I came on the board, we kind of called some of that out and said, we'll do this in translations, and this is the maximum that we can do. We kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing the department. In 5 years, they have not done a single thing towards translation in this community.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Phyllis Ling. I was a board member and secretary of Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council. I'm now a resident and stakeholder in Historic Cultural North Neighborhood Council, which includes the communities of Chinatown, El Pueblo, Solano Canyon, and Victor Heights. I'm speaking in support of the proposal to create a separate fund that neighborhood councils can access for translation services. There's great need for translation. Many of my neighbors are older, don't speak English well or at all, but do care about what's happening in our communities. I would love to be able to communicate what's going on and encourage folks to attend board meetings, but my language skills are limited. I only understand a dialect that's not used much around my neighborhood. In my experience as a board member, I've observed many arguments about translation funding. And some folks believe it's too expensive. NCs aren't mandated to provide translations, so it should be each board member's responsibility to figure out how to communicate with stakeholders. But others like me see translation as an essential administrative function related to outreach. So I support this proposal, and I also submitted a letter with 5 additional suggestions for how we could Dunn can provide additional support and related to administration.
And you can submit that to us, those ideas.
Okay, yes, I did submit
Oh,
that.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Darcy Harris. I sit on the Echo Park Neighborhood Council, and I would also strongly urge that the city find funds from a general fund instead of having each individual neighborhood council bear the cost, because some have huge costs and some have very little. I also sat on the Funding Equity Working Group, and we had 8 meetings, a lot of stuff we did not agree on. This was the thing that we all agreed on right out of the gate as low-hanging fruit, that one way to get really closer to achieving equity is for the city to fund the translation costs, not out of a general fund. So I would strongly urge you to do this. I would also say that right now it seems like the amount of unused funds matches up pretty well with the estimate for what it would cost. But if you institute the rollover, that there may be less unused funds. So I would say that you should, it's so important that you should think of finding a backup if the unused funds doesn't meet the need. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ted Yenowin, speaking on behalf of myself and not on behalf of the Echo Park Neighborhood Council, of which I am chair. Again, sending the message to neighborhood councils and to our communities that inclusion is the message here, that we want to hear from everybody, and that this is our conduit to expand culture and community, and that kind of dialogue is super important. To burden the neighborhood council further with providing these translation services, even not streamlining the process by which translation can be secured. Anyone who's used Google Translate knows that meaning is much harder to convey than simple translation services. So it's really important that it be high quality. It's important that it be easy. And it's an important message to send to all of our neighborhood councils that they need to consider what the entire community has to say about an issue and to communicate what's going on clearly in an outward sense as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And that closes public comment on this item. So in the interest of time, I mean, this is something that we all agree on, and I know it's very important for us to pass these next 2 items while we still have quorum. So if there's no objections, Mr. Wesson, I want to recommend that we note and file the Dunn and CAO report and instruct the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment to establish a centralized translation services request program and provide translation services to neighborhood councils when requested, to be paid for by the annual neighborhood council fund. Is that okay? Thank you, Mr. President. So moved and so ordered. Let's move on. And item number 3.
Item number 3 is a Dunn and CL report relative to expenditure plan, goals, objectives for the use of the Neighborhood Council election outreach funding previously allocated for the 2019 online voting pilot program scheduled pursuant to council action of December 4th, 2018.
Great. We have one public comment on this item. Laura Velke, come on up.
Thank you, council members. Just real quick here. So as I understand it, that funding or that program was canceled. So the pilot program is not happening. We got an announcement so I don't see any need to fund it. Online voting has, again, we brought this up numerous times to this committee. It's not sanctioned in the state of California. It's not a part of any voting process in the entire state, in the city or county. And it's important that we stick to those standards. If people are interested in engaging, they can come out and vote, which is what all of us do every time. I think that there's some validity and options for vote by mail, since that is a standard procedure in the voting process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Very much appreciated. So I am going to read in the recommendations that we have for this, and I really thank Don and the city clerk's office for coming together on this. The recommendations are to authorize the controller to transfer $143,000 from the office of the city clerk, Fund 100-14, to the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, Fund number 100-47, and appropriate $93,500 to account 001070 salaries as needed, and $49,500 to account 003040 contractual services. Secondarily, authorize the use of $72,000 from the Office of the City Clerk, Fund 100-14, account 1070 salaries as needed for the administration of the 2019 Neighborhood Council elections from the $215,000 previously allocated towards to conduct the online elections. 3, authorize the Office of the City Clerk to make any technical corrections to effectuate the intent of the City Council action. And recommendation number 1, no, I'm sorry. So recommendation number 1 should be this one. No, okay. Okay, great. So that will be the action to expend the unused $215,000 funds. With no objections, so moved. Thank you. And our meeting is adjourned. And thank you.